You're being unreasonable, Mom. Why can't you just do this for us? My daughter's voice trembled with a mix of frustration and desperation, cutting through the quiet of my living room like a sharp knife. I looked up from the stack of papers I was sorting, my hands still shaking slightly from the morning coffee. Melissa had always been headstrong, but today, the fire in her eyes felt different, dangerous. Behind her, Jason, my son-in-law, leaned casually against the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. I had sensed his manipulation before, but today, every instinct screamed at me that something had shifted. "Melissa?" I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have explained this already. The house is in my name. I am not transferring it. Not now, not ever, unless it's on my terms." I thought calm reasoning would work, but the defiance in her posture told me it might only make things worse. Jason stepped forward, his tone slick and insistent. "Come on, Marlene. It's just paperwork. You're being dramatic. Don't make this difficult for her." I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something rehearsed in the way he spoke, like he had planned every word. Melissa's eyes flashed at him, and I realized she had been primed to push me into compliance. "Mom, please!" "Think about it. It's just a formality," she pleaded, her voice now laced with urgency. My heart pounded. I knew what was coming. I had always been proud of my independence, but the very thought of giving up my home to Jason, someone I barely trusted, made my stomach turn. "I cannot, Melissa. This is my home. It's where I raised you, where your father and I built a life. It's not just an investment. It's my life." I tried to make her see reason, but the desperation in her eyes seemed to give way to something darker. That split second of hesitation, that moment when I realized that Jason's influence over her had gone deeper than I feared, made my blood run cold. Then it happened. She lunged toward me in a blind panic, her hands pushing me back. I stumbled, barely keeping my balance, and the edge of the balcony railing scratched my arm. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as the reality of the situation hit me. My own daughter, manipulated by her husband, was trying to push me over the edge. Time slowed. I grabbed onto the railing with all my strength, shouting her name, hoping she would stop, that reason would return. Jason didn't move. He just stood there, smirking as if this were some cruel game. I realized then that Melissa wasn't acting alone. She was under his control, and he was enjoying every moment of it. Rage and fear collided inside me. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my own daughter, the girl I had nurtured and loved, had reached a point where she would harm me. I managed to pull myself back to the balcony floor, trembling. Breathless and shaken, I glared at them both. "This ends now," I shouted. My voice cracked, but the anger gave it strength. Melissa froze, a tear streaking down her cheek, as if she suddenly remembered who I was. Jason stepped back, annoyance flickering across his face. I realized then that confrontation alone wasn't enough. I needed help, and I needed a plan. For the next hour, I stayed on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, while Melissa sat silently, unable to meet my gaze. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a battlefield. I knew I couldn't forgive her actions yet, not while my mind was still reeling from the betrayal. But I also knew I couldn't let fear control my life. My independence, my voice, my very right to live without threat, all of it depended on what I did next. By nightfall, I had made a decision. I would not call the police. Not yet, but I would take steps to protect myself. I would consult a lawyer, secure the house, and make sure Jason couldn't manipulate my daughter again. Melissa had cried herself to sleep that night on the living room couch, and Jason had disappeared into their guest room. I sat in the darkened kitchen, sipping tea, trying to calm my racing heart. The image of that near fall haunted me, a reminder that trust could be shattered in an instant. In that silence, I realized something profound. The battle was no longer just about a house. It was about my autonomy, my dignity, and my right to make decisions without coercion. And I was determined not to lose it. Not to my daughter, not to Jason, not to anyone. Tomorrow, I would begin the fight to reclaim my life. Tonight, I let myself shiver in fear, cry in relief that I had survived, and steel myself for the struggle that lay ahead. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows felt almost mocking. The house was calm, serene, as if it had no memory of the chaos from the night before. But I could still feel it in my bones, the cold shock of betrayal, the sharp tang of fear, and the sickening realization that Jason had infiltrated the heart of my family. Melissa hadn't spoken a word since the incident, and Jason avoided eye contact entirely. pacing the living room as if deciding whether to play the role of remorseful husband or calculating predator. I made my way to the study, my sanctuary of reason, and pulled out a notebook. The first thing I did was make a list vulnerabilities in my home, the legal documents I needed to protect my ownership of the house, and steps to secure my finances. Fear could not guide me, only preparation could. I called the lawyer I had used years ago, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia. She listened quietly as I explained the situation, her voice calm but resolute. "We'll take immediate action," she said. "First, we ensure the property is protected. Second, we review any financial documents that Jason could use to manipulate your daughter. Third, we consider a safety plan. You are not alone in this." Hanging up, I felt a sliver of relief. Help was on the way. But the real challenge would be confronting Melissa without pushing her further into Jason's orbit. I had spent hours reflecting on her childhood, the way she had been so dependent on approval, and I realized that Jason had been exploiting her vulnerabilities from the moment she married him. My heart ached for her. I could see now that she wasn't inherently cruel. She was trapped in a web of manipulation that had twisted her perception of right and wrong. While I was deep in thought, I heard movement behind me. Melissa emerged from the kitchen, hair messy, eyes red from crying. She avoided my gaze but mumbled, "Mom, I didn't mean." I held up my hand. "Don't. Not yet. We will talk, but only after you've begun to understand what happened yesterday. Right now, I need you to be honest with me. Can you do that?" Her lip quivered, but she nodded reluctantly. Jason, sensing he wasn't welcome in this conversation, retreated to the bedroom. I took a deep breath. "Melissa, Jason manipulated you. He didn't love you. He wanted the house, control, and he used your emotions against you. Yesterday, I nearly lost my life because of his lies. Do you understand that?" She looked down at her hands, ashamed. I know. I didn't see it at first. I didn't know how far he would go." I nodded slowly. The acknowledgement was a start, but the real work had just begun. Over the next few days, I began tightening security. New locks were installed, cameras discreetly placed, and Patricia handled the paperwork to ensure my home and assets were fully protected. I also scheduled an appointment with a psychologist for Melissa, someone who specialized in coercive relationships and manipulation. I wanted her to understand, in a safe environment, how her choices had been influenced and to rebuild her sense of autonomy. Meanwhile, Jason grew visibly frustrated. He tried subtle intimidation tactics, sharp comments, lingering in doorways, attempts to isolate Melissa, but I refused to rise to his provocations. Instead, I documented everything. Every threatening word, every manipulation, every attempt to control. Patricia assured me that a paper trail would be invaluable should legal action become necessary. I realized that fear was a tool Jason relied on, and by refusing to be afraid, I was already gaining the upper hand. Melissa, slowly and painfully, began attending therapy. Her sessions were not easy. She confronted truths she had long avoided, faced the reality of her marriage, and began to see how deeply Jason had poisoned her judgment. It pained me to watch her struggle, but it was necessary. True healing required honesty, and she was beginning to grasp that. One evening, after another therapy session, she came to me quietly. "Mom, I want to make this right," she said, her voice small but sincere. I took her hands, feeling the tremor of vulnerability. "It starts with truth, Melissa. No excuses, no lies. And it starts with understanding the damage done, not just to me, but to yourself." She nodded, tears spilling freely. "I know I'll do whatever it takes." In that moment, I realized something profound. Fear could no longer dictate our relationship. The balcony incident had been a wake-up call, not just for Melissa, but for me as well. I had spent too many years allowing others' decisions to sway my own. Now, I would protect myself, guide my daughter through her mistakes, and reclaim the life I had earned through decades of hard work and resilience. That night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights twinkle, I allowed myself a quiet moment of determination. Tomorrow, Melissa and I would face Jason together. Tomorrow, I would reinforce the boundaries he had tried to destroy. And tomorrow, I promised myself the fight for our family, and for my independence, would truly begin. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual. I could sense Jason's irritation even before I saw him. He had spent the night pacing, muttering under his breath, likely frustrated that his control over Melissa was slipping. When he emerged into the kitchen, he tried a forced smile, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Morning," he said, tone too casual. I ignored it, pouring pouring myself a cup of coffee, savoring its bitter warmth. Melissa hovered behind him, her shoulders tense, her gaze flicking between us like a bird trapped in a cage. "Jason," I said finally, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." He looked surprised, as though he hadn't expected me to confront him directly. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "Not you," I said, pointing to Melissa. "You will speak after I've made something very clear. Yesterday nearly cost me my life. You threatened your own mother. In law for a house that isn't even yours. Do you understand how serious that is?" For a moment, the room was silent. Jason's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "It wasn't like that," he started, but I cut him off. "No. Stop lying. Stop manipulating. You will speak when it's your turn, but not now. First, you need to hear this." I turned to Melissa, who still looked unsure. "Melissa, this isn't a punishment. This is reality. The man you married is dangerous. He manipulates, deceives, and isolates. And yesterday, you became part of that cycle. Do you understand that?" She swallowed hard, nodding slightly. "I think I do, Mom," she whispered. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain composed. "Good, because if we are going to move forward, we need to establish boundaries. Jason is no longer welcome in this house until he shows accountability. And that starts with truth, admission of wrongdoing, and respect for your mother and our family." Jason's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "You can't do that," he snapped. "Melissa?" I held up a hand to stop him. "Melissa will speak when she's ready. Right now, this is about you. You've already shown your true colors. You cannot intimidate or threaten me, nor can you manipulate my daughter anymore." "Understood." He clenched his teeth and nodded reluctantly, but I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. This was far from over. Over the next few days, I coordinated closely with Patricia. She drafted legal protections, including a restraining order and emergency financial safeguards. Every document was meticulously reviewed, leaving no loopholes for Jason to exploit. Melissa began to see, gradually, how precarious her situation had been, how easily she had been swayed by his charm, and how dangerous it was to underestimate his capacity for manipulation. During one therapy session, Melissa broke down completely. I didn't know it would get this far. She admitted between sobs. The psychologist nodded patiently, guiding her through the recognition of control and coercion. "Many victims only see the manipulation after it escalates." She explained, "What matters now is your response, how you reclaim your autonomy and rebuild your life." Melissa clutched a tissue, nodding. I want to be strong again. I don't want to feel scared anymore." That evening, Jason tried to corner her in the living room, attempting one of his subtle intimidation tactics. But Melissa, armed with knowledge and reinforced by therapy, stood her ground. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I am not doing what you want. This ends now." I watched from the doorway, heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. She was finally seeing through his control. The confrontation escalated the next day when I made an unannounced call to Edward's previous victims. Yes, Jason wasn't the first to use such manipulation. One woman confirmed his pattern, describing similar lies, schemes, and emotional abuse. Melissa listened quietly as I relayed the stories. Her eyes widened with shock but also understanding. I wasn't alone," she whispered. "He does this to everyone." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "Exactly. That's why we're taking steps to protect you, and why you can't go back to him. You need distance, clarity, and support to recover." The weight of that realization seemed to hit her fully. For the first time, she truly saw Jason not as a lover, but as a predator. And for the first time, she began to reclaim the part of herself that had been overshadowed by fear and manipulation. That night, as I sat by the window again, I felt a measure of calm. The house, once a battleground, was slowly becoming a place of safety. The road ahead would be long. Melissa had a lot to unlearn, and Jason would not give up without a fight. But we had begun to reclaim control. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the first step in surviving any storm was standing firm, refusing to be intimidated, and preparing for what was to come. Tomorrow we would take another step, and this time, I vowed silently, there would be no compromise. The following week, the tension in the house felt almost tangible. Melissa was no longer the frightened girl who had cowered in the corner at Jason's slightest suggestion. She walked taller, spoke with more conviction, and met my eyes without hesitation. But I knew better than to assume Jason would let go without a fight. He thrived on control, and losing it would infuriate him. It started with small things. Jason called Melissa incessantly, each time leaving messages that were polite on the surface, but laced with subtle threats. "I hope you'll think this through," he said in one voice deceptively calm. "We can work this out for everyone's sake." Melissa would hand me the phone, her hands trembling slightly. I took the phone from her, listening, and then immediately hung up. "He's testing your resolve," I told her. "Every call like this is meant to shake your confidence. Do not answer." Despite the constant barrage, Melissa's progress in therapy showed. She learned to recognize the manipulative patterns, the guilt, tripping, the feigned concern, the sudden displays of vulnerability designed to make her feel responsible for his behavior. Each time, she confronted her fear rather than letting it control her. And each time, I was there to reinforce that strength. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Melissa ran in, panic written across her face. "Mum," she gasped, "he's here. Jason's outside. He says he wants to talk." My stomach dropped. I had suspected he might try something, but seeing him near our home brought an entirely new level of fear. I moved toward the door slowly, trying to stay calm, my mind racing through every possible precaution. "Don't open it," I instructed firmly. "Call the police and tell them he's here. Do not let him in." Melissa fumbled with her phone but managed to dial 911. Within minutes, the police arrived, and Jason's expression shifted from smug confidence to thinly veiled anger. He tried to argue, claiming he had a right to speak with his wife. The officers stood firm, explaining that he was creating a disturbance and harassing the victim of previous threats. As he was escorted away, I watched Melissa exhale for the first time that afternoon. Relief washed over her, but so did the reality Jason would not give up easily. That evening, I sat with Melissa and went over the plan we had been working on for weeks. Security cameras, reinforced locks, emergency contacts, and safe words were discussed in detail. Melissa asked if I would stay with her at night, and I agreed without hesitation. She needed reassurance. Yes. But more importantly, she needed to know she was not alone. "You're strong," I said, gripping her hand. "But you don't have to be strong alone. We're in this together." Over the next few days, Jason tried more subtle tactics, social media messages, fake accounts attempting to contact Melissa, and even mutual friends coerced into delivering messages. But each attempt was met with the same unwavering boundaries. Melissa no longer responded to provocation. Instead, she documented everything and shared it with the authorities. Watching her grow from fear into strategic action was one of the most gratifying experiences of my life. Despite this, the emotional toll was undeniable. Melissa cried in therapy sessions, reliving the moments she had been manipulated and controlled. She confessed guilt, shame, and confusion, but gradually, she began to replace those feelings with understanding and self-compassion. "I wasn't weak," she said during one session. "I was deceived, and now I'm learning to protect myself." The psychologist nodded, her eyes filled with approval. "Exactly. Strength is not avoiding danger. It's facing it and reclaiming your life." One late evening, as the house grew quiet, I found myself staring at the balcony, the very one from which I had almost been pushed. My pulse quickened at the memory. I had survived, yes, but the psychological scars remained. I knew Jason would stop at nothing to regain control over Melissa, and he might attempt something reckless again. But I also knew that our preparation, our vigilance, and our unbreakable bond were stronger than any threat he could pose. That night, I hugged Melissa tightly before bed. "No matter what happens," I whispered, "we face it together, and we win together." She clung to me, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from the relief of feeling safe, loved, and empowered. In that embrace, I felt a renewed determination. I would protect my daughter at all costs, even if it meant confronting dangers I had once thought unimaginable. Tomorrow we would take another step: legal action, security reinforcement, and continued therapy. Jason's presence in our lives had escalated, but it had also solidified our resilience. Fear had once ruled us, but now clarity, courage, and unwavering maternal love would guide every decision. And I knew, deep in my heart, that we were no longer victims. We were survivors. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, but it did little to ease the tension that had settled over our home. The previous week had been a blur of police reports, security upgrades, and late-night planning sessions. Melissa moved through the house quietly, alert, always glancing toward the door as if expecting Jason to appear at any moment. I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. She was my daughter, my blood, and nothing would stop me from keeping her safe. By mid-morning, a sharp knock echoed through the house. I froze, recognizing the sound instantly. Melissa was in the living room, tense and silent, her hands gripping the edge of the sofa. "Mom," she whispered. "It's him." My heart thumped in my chest. I moved toward the door slowly, my mind racing through every precaution we had planned. Melissa's voice quivered slightly as she called out, "Jason, if you're here, leave. We've called the police. Leave now." He leaned against the frame, casual, almost mocking. "Melissa," he said smoothly, "come on. Let's just talk." "Mom, I know you think you're protecting her, but I only want to explain." I stepped in front of her, blocking his path. "You will not step inside this house, Jason. Any attempt to do so, and the police will be called immediately." His eyes narrowed, but he smiled faintly, a predator confident in his control. Melissa's courage surprised me. She straightened, voice firm. "I'm done talking to you. Leave, Jason." The words had weight now, a finality he hadn't heard before. I could see the flicker of frustration in his eyes, the tension between his carefully maintained composure and the raw anger simmering underneath. He hesitated, and in that moment, I silently thanked every precaution we had taken. Security cameras, emergency contacts, and our plan rehearsed so many times. He finally stepped back, raising his hand slightly. "Fine," he muttered. "But this isn't over." He turned and walked away, his steps heavy, his threat unspoken but clear. Melissa exhaled, relief washing over her face. "Mom, thank you," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I pulled her close, holding her tightly. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for standing up to him. You were incredible." The next day, we met with our lawyer to file a restraining order. Melissa's courage in confronting her fear had given her an unshakable resolve, and the legal system provided the protection we needed. Every document signed, every statement given, felt like a step away from the darkness Jason had cast over our lives. But the emotional scars ran deeper than any legal paper could reach. I saw the pain in Melissa's eyes, the fear that lingered despite the newfound safety. That evening, I decided we needed a moment of normalcy. We prepared dinner together, chatting quietly, the simple act of chopping vegetables and stirring sauces offering a sense of routine. "Mom," Melissa said suddenly, "I can't stop thinking about the night he tried to manipulate me. I felt so helpless, and yet now I feel strong. I don't know why." I smiled softly. "Because Melissa's strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about facing your fear and choosing to act despite it. And you did. Every time you stood up to him, every time you documented his lies, every time you didn't answer his calls, you were strong." As we sat down to eat, I noticed something different. The tension that had clung to our home was easing, replaced by cautious optimism. Melissa laughed quietly at a small joke I made, the sound fragile but real. "Mom," she said after a moment, "I know it's going to take time. I'm not going to forget the fear, but I'm learning that I don't have to live in it." I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "And you never will, as long as we face it together." Later that night, I checked the security cameras one last time before bed. Jason's car was gone, the driveway empty, but I didn't allow myself to relax completely. The fight wasn't over yet, and we had to remain vigilant. Melissa slept in the next room, exhausted from the day's events, but I could hear the faint, steady rhythm of her breathing, and it gave me hope. She was no longer a victim paralyzed by fear. She was a survivor reclaiming her life, step by step. That night, I reflected on everything that had happened, the manipulation, the threats, the moments of sheer terror, and realized that the most dangerous force Jason wielded had been the illusion of control. But we had broken that illusion. With every precaution, every boundary, and every act of courage, we had shifted the balance of power, and I knew, with certainty, that Jason would never have the same hold over Melissa again. I resolved to stay close, to continue guiding her, and to ensure she had the tools to protect herself. The battle had been terrifying, yes, but it had also revealed a strength within both of us we hadn't known existed, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that the worst was behind us and that the future, though uncertain, could be reclaimed one step at a time. The days that followed were a delicate balance between vigilance and normalcy. Melissa's resolve had strengthened, but the shadow of Jason's manipulation still lingered, like a low hum at the edge of awareness. I insisted she continue therapy sessions, not just to process the trauma, but to learn how to recognize subtle threats before they escalated. Each session revealed layers of influence Jason had exerted, small, calculated moves that had chipped away at her confidence, making her doubt herself at every turn. One afternoon, as Melissa walked in from work, her face tense, I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands. "Mom," she said quietly, tried calling again. I didn't answer. But I can't stop thinking about it. I took a deep breath, kneeling to her level. "Melissa, this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing. You have the right to set boundaries and refuse contact. Remember, you don't owe him a single explanation. Not now, not ever." Her eyes met mine, teary but resolute. "I know, but hearing his voice, even just the ringtone, it makes my stomach twist. It's like he's still controlling me." We spent the next hour reviewing safety protocols, how to screen calls, change passwords, and recognize signs of harassment. Melissa took meticulous notes, a combination of fear and determination fueling her focus. "I'm not going to let him have power over me anymore," she said firmly, and I knew she meant it. Each precaution we took, each tool we equipped her with, chipped away at the control Jason had once wielded with ease. The following week, we received a message from the lawyer confirming that the restraining order had been officially granted. Jason was legally prohibited from contacting Melissa or coming within a certain distance of our home. Relief washed over us, tempered by the awareness that legal protection was only one layer of defense. Emotional boundaries, personal strength, and vigilance were just as crucial. During one therapy session, Melissa spoke about her feelings of guilt. "Mom, I keep thinking, maybe if I'd just done what he wanted, none of this would have happened. Maybe I could have saved myself all the fear." I shook my head firmly. "Melissa, no one should have to give in to threats. What he did was wrong, no matter what you chose. Your fear was a natural response to a predator, not a moral failing." She nodded, but the shadows in her eyes revealed the lingering impact of Jason's psychological grip. That night, while preparing dinner, Melissa suddenly asked, "Mom, do you think I'll ever feel completely safe again?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. Safety isn't just about walls or locks. It's about knowing your own strength and trusting yourself. And you've done that already. You've faced fear and acted despite it. That's the truest form of safety, Melissa. She smiled weakly, the kind of smile that carried both exhaustion and a hint of hope. The weekend brought an unexpected opportunity for empowerment. Melissa's workplace organized a seminar on personal safety, and she volunteered to share her story anonymously. Watching her speak, even in a controlled and protected environment, was transformative. Her voice was steady, her message clear. Knowledge and awareness were weapons against manipulation and abuse. She was turning her trauma into a tool, not just for herself, but for others who might face similar threats. By the end of the seminar, colleagues approached her, offering support and sharing experiences of their own. Melissa's eyes shone with a newfound confidence. "Mom," she whispered later, "I feel lighter. Like this weight I've been carrying isn't crushing me anymore." I hugged her tightly, feeling a surge of pride. She was reclaiming herself, piece by piece, lesson by lesson. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, reflecting on the transformation I'd witnessed in my daughter. From the terrified girl who had clung to me in fear of Jason, she had evolved into someone who could stand firm, recognize danger, and protect herself. The journey wasn't over. He could still attempt to intrude, to manipulate, or to intimidate, but Melissa now possessed the tools and mindset to face him without losing herself. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Jason, postmarked 2 states away. I handed it to Melissa without comment. Her hands trembled as she opened it, but she quickly set it aside. "Mom, it's just words," she said firmly. "I don't have to listen. I don't have to fear them." That night, we destroyed the letter together, a symbolic act of reclaiming control. The threat it represented was gone, not because he had stopped, but because we had stopped letting him have power over us. Melissa looked at me with gratitude and determination. "Mom, thank you for standing by me, even when I didn't understand it myself." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. "I will always stand by you. No matter what comes next, we face it together." And in that moment, the fear that had haunted both of us for months began to dissipate, replaced by something stronger: resilience, trust, and the unshakable bond between mother and daughter. It had been nearly 2 months since Jason's restraining order was issued. Melissa had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of her boundaries, yet the tension in the air never fully dissipated. I could sense her vigilance even in mundane moments, how she scanned her surroundings, how her hand instinctively reached for her phone whenever a stranger approached. I wanted her to feel safe without constantly being on edge, but I also knew that Jason's unpredictable nature demanded caution. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, Melissa received a text. I noticed her fingers stiffen around the phone. It was from an unknown number. "Mom, it's him," she whispered, panic flaring in her eyes. I grabbed her hand, grounding her. "Let's take a breath. We follow the rules we set. Don't respond." "Not yet." She nodded, swallowing hard, her pulse racing. The next day, Jason escalated. Our front gate rattled violently at 3 a.m., accompanied by a muffled shout I couldn't fully make out. I immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes, their presence a reassuring barrier between Melissa and the chaos outside. Jason had driven from another state, hoping that proximity would intimidate her. Instead, he had underestimated our preparedness. Surveillance cameras captured every movement, and the authorities were ready with a warrant. Melissa, trembling but resolute, held my hand as the officers approached. "I'm not afraid of him anymore, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with a conviction that echoed through me. I squeezed her hand. "You've earned this strength, Melissa. This is what we've worked for." She nodded, tears streaming but unafraid. It was the first time I had seen her face the threat without a flicker of fear dictating her reaction. When Jason was finally apprehended, the gravity of his failures became evident. He tried to argue, to manipulate, to charm his way out of consequences, but the documentation of his prior schemes, the restraining order, and our meticulous preparations left no room for escape. The court moved swiftly, issuing a permanent injunction and extending his imprisonment for violations of multiple state laws. For once, justice wasn't just a concept. It was real, immediate, and protective. In the days that followed, Melissa and I began reclaiming our home. Locks were changed, alarms installed, and routines adjusted to create both comfort and safety. Yet the true work was emotional, rebuilding trust in ourselves, in each other, and in the notion that we could live free from fear. Therapy sessions focused on reinforcing resilience and identifying triggers that could lead to lingering anxiety. Melissa often expressed relief that she could finally breathe, unburdened by the constant dread that Jason instilled. One evening, as we sat on the porch with tea, she said, "Mom, I think I'm finally beginning to forgive myself for not seeing him sooner, for not stopping him before he got so far." I placed a hand over hers. "Forgiveness isn't just about the other person, Melissa. It's about releasing the hold they've had on you, and you're doing it step by step." She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and the lingering scars of trauma. "I feel lighter," she admitted, "like I can finally plan a life without constantly looking over my shoulder." Our home, once a site of fear, began to feel like a sanctuary again. The garden, where Melissa and I had often retreated to discuss safety plans or debrief after incidents, became a place of reflection and quiet triumph. Each flower that bloomed seemed to symbolize a piece of our reclaimed life, proof that growth could occur even after the harshest seasons. One afternoon, Melissa received a letter from a domestic abuse support group she had joined anonymously. It included a request for her to participate in a webinar, sharing her story to educate others. She hesitated at first, remembering the fear and manipulation she had endured, but ultimately she accepted. Standing before a virtual audience, speaking candidly about boundaries, manipulation, and resilience, Melissa's voice carried authority and empathy. She was no longer merely a survivor, she was an advocate, a beacon for those navigating similar dark waters. After the webinar, she turned to me, eyes shining with both exhaustion and pride. "Mom, I think this is the first time I've ever felt like my experience has a purpose beyond just surviving." I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by the transformation I had witnessed. "You've turned pain into power, Melissa. You've turned fear into courage. That's remarkable." For the first time since the ordeal began, our home felt truly safe, not because threats had vanished completely. Life had a way of presenting challenges, but because Melissa had the inner armor and external support to confront any future danger. And in that strength, I found my own sense of peace, knowing that we had endured the storm together and emerged unbroken. The weeks after Jason's arrest were transformative. Melissa and I slowly settled into routines that felt normal, yet held an undercurrent of careful vigilance. Our home no longer carried the weight of constant dread, but the memories of near disaster lingered, shaping how we navigated daily life. Every door lock we checked, every alarm beep, every cautious glance outside was a reminder of what we had endured, but also of the strength we now carried. Melissa started venturing out more confidently. The once small and timid woman who had clung to my side during storms of fear now walked through the neighborhood with purpose. She reconnected with friends she had unknowingly isolated herself from under Jason's influence, smiling freely, laughing again. I could see her reclaiming her identity, her real identity, not the one molded by fear and manipulation, and every step she took reminded me of why I had fought so hard for her. One Saturday, she suggested we take a trip to a local art exhibit. "Mom, I think it's time we start enjoying life again," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. I smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks, and nodded. "You're right, let's do this." The exhibit, filled with vibrant paintings and sculptures, became a metaphor for our own lives. Each piece told a story of struggle, resilience, and eventual triumph. As we walked through the gallery, Melissa paused in front of a painting of a phoenix rising from flames. "Mom, that's us, isn't it?" she whispered. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Yes, Melissa, that's exactly us." Therapy continued to play a central role in our recovery. Our sessions no longer revolved around fear or reliving trauma. They focused on growth, understanding, and building a future free from past shadows. Melissa's therapist encouraged her to explore long-term goals, not just survival strategies. Slowly, Melissa began envisioning a life she could design for herself, not one dictated by the manipulations of someone like Jason. She started applying for new jobs, volunteering at local community centers, and even considering going back to school to finish a degree she had paused years ago. One afternoon, while we were having lunch at home, Melissa shared something that made my heart swell. "Mom, I've been thinking about moving into my own place. Something small, safe, but completely mine. I need to prove to myself that I can live independently and confidently." I nodded, hiding a lump in my throat. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Melissa. You've earned every bit of that independence, and I'll support you every step of the way." The sense of pride I felt was indescribable. This wasn't just about a daughter moving out. It was about a woman reclaiming her life on her own terms. Our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Melissa began sharing her daily thoughts, fears, and triumphs openly, without the filter of fear or shame. I, in turn, shared my own experiences and reflections, showing her that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. We laughed, we cried, and we celebrated small victories, like the first night Melissa slept without checking every window, or the day she confidently signed the lease for her new apartment. Despite the progress, moments of tension occasionally surfaced. Old habits of fear and mistrust lingered in both of us. One evening, Melissa hesitated before answering a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mom, what if it's him?" she asked quietly. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's not. And even if it were, you now have the strength, the tools, and the support to handle it. You've come so far, Melissa." She took a deep breath, smiling faintly. That moment symbolized the shift from fear to empowerment, the hallmark of her recovery. By the end of that month, Melissa had moved into her new apartment. I helped her set it up, each decoration and piece of furniture a symbol of her regained independence. As we unpacked boxes, she looked at me with gratitude in her eyes. "Mom, thank you for never giving up on me, even when I pushed you away. I know now that you weren't just protecting me from him. You were helping me protect myself." I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of all the fear, pain, and struggle lift from both of us. "You did the hard work, Melissa. I just reminded you of the strength you already had." That night, as I drove home, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for keeping Melissa safe, but for witnessing her transformation, her courage, her resilience, and her ability to reclaim her life. The battle with Jason had ended, but the real victory was seeing my daughter stand tall, unafraid, and confident in herself for the first time in years. Melissa's newfound independence was inspiring, but it also meant navigating challenges I hadn't anticipated. Moving into her own apartment was one thing, reconnecting with the people she had withdrawn from during Jason's manipulation was another. Friends, distant relatives, and colleagues, all of whom had once been part of her life, now felt like strangers, and Melissa was understandably cautious. But she was determined to reclaim those connections, and I quietly supported her every step of the way. One evening, she suggested inviting a few old friends over for dinner. "Mom, I know it's just a small gathering, but I think I need to start rebuilding my social life," she said, nervously fidgeting with the invitation list. I smiled at her, pride swelling in my chest. "That's a wonderful idea. Reconnecting doesn't happen overnight, but you're taking the right steps." The night of the dinner, the apartment buzzed with tentative laughter and awkward hugs. Melissa moved among her guests with a quiet grace, slowly shedding the fear that had once bound her. Watching her, I realized how far she had come, from the terrified, manipulated woman who had clung to me, to someone capable of forming her own relationships again. Not all encounters were smooth. One friend, someone who hadn't understood Melissa's situation, made a casual comment about trust and betrayal that caused a visible twinge of discomfort. Melissa, however, didn't retreat. Instead, she calmly explained the difficulties she had faced and why it had taken time for her to rebuild her confidence. The honesty, combined with her newfound strength, changed the tone of the evening. Her friends listened, some with eyes wide, some with tears silently glistening, realizing that Melissa's journey was far more profound than they had imagined. Around this time, I also began reaching out to distant family members, cousins, aunts, and uncles who had been silently watching from afar, unsure of how to help. My phone calls were tentative at first, filled with cautious explanations of what had transpired. Many were shocked, some angry, but almost all were moved by the resilience Melissa had shown. A few weeks later, we organized a small family gathering, celebrating not only Melissa's independence, but also the return of safety, honesty, and trust to our lives. At that gathering, I noticed Melissa interacting with a relative she had once feared, my sister, Diane. Their conversations were hesitant, then gradually warmed into laughter and reminiscences of past holidays, school events, and family traditions. Diane pulled me aside, tears in her eyes. "She's different now," she whispered. "There's a confidence in her that wasn't there before. You were right to fight for her." I smiled, feeling a sense of validation for the battles we had endured, battles that had now yielded tangible, life-affirming results. Therapy continued to play a crucial role. Melissa had grown comfortable discussing her fears, triumphs, and even doubts about trust with her therapist. She learned to recognize patterns of manipulation, to assert boundaries, and to reclaim control over her decisions. She also explored the guilt she had carried for allowing herself to be manipulated, learning to forgive herself while still taking responsibility for growth. The therapy sessions were not easy. There were tears, moments of frustration, and nights of restless sleep, but every step forward reinforced her resilience. Meanwhile, I reflected on my own recovery. I had been so focused on protecting Melissa that I had neglected my own emotions, my own lingering fears about trust and betrayal. Slowly, I began attending therapy sessions myself, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to understand my responses, fears, and boundaries more deeply. Those sessions helped me recognize how deeply parental fear can shape decisions, how the instinct to protect can sometimes overshadow one's own emotional needs. They also taught me how to strike a balance, how to be a protective mother without allowing past trauma to define every interaction. As weeks passed, Melissa began volunteering at a local women's center. She wanted to help others who had faced manipulation, abuse, or control, turning her painful experiences into a source of empathy and guidance. Watching her interact with these women, sharing her story, listening with compassion, encouraging resilience, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She was no longer just my daughter. She was becoming a mentor, a survivor, and an advocate. By the end of the 3 months following her move, Melissa had rebuilt a network of friends, reconnected with family, and established routines that reflected her independence and growth. I could see her standing taller, speaking with clarity, and smiling without fear. The shadows of Jason's manipulation had faded, replaced with the light of confidence, resilience, and love. The months that followed were transformative, not just for Melissa, but for both of us. The final piece of the puzzle was rebuilding trust in our relationship. Our weekly therapy sessions had shifted from tense explorations of past trauma to discussions of future goals, dreams, and boundaries. Melissa had become more confident, more self-aware, and more grounded. She could laugh without reservation, speak without hesitation, and plan without fear. And I could finally breathe, knowing that my daughter was safe and strong. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Melissa and I sat together on her apartment balcony. We held cups of tea and simply watched the city lights flicker on one by one. It was a peaceful silence, a stark contrast to the chaos of the months prior. "Mom," she said finally, breaking the calm, "I want you to know something important." I turned to her, sensing the weight of her words. "I understand now why you refused to transfer the house to Jason. At the time, I was angry and confused, but I see it clearly now. You were protecting me, even when I couldn't see it." My throat tightened. "I just wanted to keep you safe," I whispered. Melissa reached across and held my hand. "And you did. More than you know. I've learned so much about boundaries, about recognizing manipulation, and about standing up for myself. None of that would have been possible if you hadn't been firm. You saved me from a life of loss and regret." Her words filled me with a mixture of relief, pride, and deep emotion. For so long, I had questioned my choices, wondered if I had been too harsh, too cautious. Now I knew I had done exactly what a mother should, protect her child, even when it was difficult. The next day, Melissa and I went through old photo albums. Pictures of her as a toddler, laughing at birthday parties, and the family vacations we had shared. Memories that once seemed distant suddenly felt alive again. Each photo reminded us that despite the darkness, there had always been a foundation of love beneath it all. And now, that love was strong enough to withstand any manipulation or betrayal. Weeks later, we received news that Jason had been arrested for fraud in another city. It was a bittersweet moment, relief that he could no longer harm others, but sorrow for all the damage he had caused. Melissa's calm, composed reaction surprised me. "Mom," she said, "I feel peace knowing he's gone from our lives. I don't want revenge. I want life, our life, to be about growth and healing, not anger." Her maturity, her clarity, reflected just how far she had come. In the following months, our bond strengthened through shared routines, open communication, and intentional acts of care. Melissa continued her volunteer work, helping women rebuild their lives, and often invited me along. We shared tears, laughter, and countless moments of understanding that had been absent during the chaos of Jason's schemes. Our home, once a place of fear and uncertainty, became a sanctuary of trust, respect, and unconditional love. One Sunday afternoon, while preparing lunch together, Melissa paused and looked at me. "Mum, I want to thank you for everything. For believing in me, for standing up to Jason, for refusing to let him take what was ours. I know I haven't always been the easiest daughter, but you never gave up on me." I hugged her tightly. "And I never will. You're my daughter. That's permanent. The mistakes, the pain, they don't erase that. What matters is that we keep moving forward, together." By the end of the year, Melissa had not only reclaimed her independence, but had also become a beacon of hope for others. She started hosting support meetings at the local community center, sharing her story to inspire women facing manipulation or abuse. Watching her transform her pain into purpose, I realized that the ordeal we endured had forged a resilience that could not be broken. Finally, one evening, Melissa and I sat on the porch of my home, the house Jason had tried to take from us, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Mom," she said softly, "I've learned so much about forgiveness, about strength, about love. And I've learned that's okay to lean on others while still standing tall on my own." I nodded, tears in my eyes. "And I've learned that protecting someone doesn't mean controlling them. It means trusting them to grow, even when the path is difficult." We sat together in silence, the weight of the past lifted, replaced with hope, gratitude, and a deep, unbreakable bond. The balcony, once a symbol of danger, now felt like a witness to our triumph. A place where fear had been replaced by love, manipulation replaced by understanding, and betrayal replaced by trust. In that moment, I realized that despite the darkness Jason had brought into our lives, we had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. And for the first time in years, I felt a calm certainty. No one could ever take this away from us. Not him, not anyone. We were free. Melissa squeezed my hand. "Here's to new beginnings, Mom." I smiled. "Here's to us, always." The sun set behind the city skyline, casting golden light across our faces. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly right.